Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Sales Scoop. This is a weekly live show for the founders and senior leaders of tech businesses who want to improve how they sell. I'm Alistair Cole, your host for today. I'm a computer scientist and ex-software engineer with 2 decades experience in sales and marketing. And I'm joined today by David Stent, a good friend of mine and the corporate partnerships manager at Turn to Us. Hello, David.
Hello, how are you doing, Al? Are you all right?
I'm very good, thanks, my friend. I'm very good, Dave. Very good to see you, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah, you and I know each other from, we live quite close. We've got very similar kind of corporate backgrounds. We've been friends for a couple of years. I'm delighted that you've been able to make some time and join me on the show
No,
today.
thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. And one of the things that you and I shared discussions recently around the focus of belief in sales and why it matters so much, and diving into it. I mean, it's a fascinating topic, and I can't wait to get into the kind of deep nitty gritty. But before we get into your sales scoop on that, could you tell us a little bit about you and your journey for our audience, please?
Yeah, sure. So let me just get the camera right. So I'm David Stent. So I am one of the corporate partnerships managers at Turn to Us, which is a financial hardship charity that operates across the UK. I've only been with Turn to Us for 6 weeks, and I suppose it's responsible of me to say that what he said on this live podcast or live webcam or is my views and not Turn to Us, and it's my experience. Prior to time with Turn to Us, I worked briefly in sales for 2 asset finance companies. Prior to that, I worked as a business analyst for one of the same companies in IT, and then going a long way back, starting in 2008, at the peak of the financial crisis, Lehman Brothers had just been emptied of all its staff, and I started at Accenture, where I worked for, I think it was around 5 years. So yeah, that's a brief itinerary there of my CV.
Yeah, and it would be fair to say that you spent a fair chunk of time in sales and business development and income generation
Yeah.
over the majority, if not all, of your career, which
Yeah.
is fascinating. So I can't wait to hear how it grows. So I mean, Turn to Us. They've been around for a very long time, 1897, right? They were
I have,
founded.
yeah, that's right. Elizabeth Finn Holmes, and it was started by an Irish Catholic lady called Elizabeth and her daughter. And they've, like I say, they're one of the longest charities in the UK, especially related to financial hardship. And I suppose their bread and butter was and still is care homes. I think there's eight or nine care homes that are connected with Turn to Us. But yeah, they're a national charity working towards alleviating financial hardship and poverty in the UK.
Yeah, and it's not just words. I mean, I saw that the Royal London had announced in March of this year £2 million commitment to this ongoing partnership in order to, support conversations and promote sector-wide change around, hardships, but through research and advocacy. And your interim head of policy there, Lucy Bannister, wrote in the big issue about two guidelines encouraging government to talk less disparagingly about those in financial
That's
hardship.
right.
So it really kind of boots on the ground, looking for changing
Yeah,
like words so that people feel less
and
shame about being in
the
financial hardship.
stigma associated with basically
Yeah.
claiming benefits that people are entitled to, and I think Lucy and the rest of the team are working hard to kind of remove or reduce some of that stigma. I personally have been working closely with kind of establishing corporate partnerships with some big sporting organizations, which would go some way to reducing that stigma. And I hope that we can kind of get over those last few hurdles with them. And I think it's so important. I think each year of 2024, I think it was over £22 billion in the UK, which was allocated for welfare for people to claim, wasn't claimed. And that's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
That's people basically not being aware of what they're entitled to, the the process for it being very difficult, very complex, people not being technology literate to do that. But also, there's a massive, massive factor that stigma plays in there, that people don't want to say that they take handouts, as people do say. I mean, I always
Yeah.
remember my dad. My dad always said that he'd never taken benefits or welfare in his life, and between jobs he went window cleaning, and that's all well and good. But I think those kind of that doesn't feed into the narrative very well when people are desperate and people shun them and think negative of them. So I think it's really important to work with everyone at Turn to Us and wider than that to reduce the stigma associated with benefits and welfare.
Yeah, I mean, I was staggered to read that in a recent survey, 50% of people asked said that if they needed to, take a benefit,
Yeah,
which is a natural part of running society, right?
yeah,
As humans, that they would feel, because of the language stuff, that 50% would, at least 50% would feel shame,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
of this, because of that statement. Half of the population in that survey, and that's obviously, that doesn't help, right? It doesn't help
No,
move the
no,
needle. Um, so, so you took us all the way back through your career there, right? Starting at Accenture. Back then, Dave. Back then, is this where he saw himself now?
gosh, no. I mean, the earliest ever kind of thoughts towards a career was following watching Top Gun at my friend's farm when I was from primary school, and I thought, well, that's me. I'm going to be a F-15 pilot, even though the RAF don't actually have any F-15s. That was where I was going. I went to a careers office for the RAF in Doncaster, where I grew up, and I was asthmatic, so that was that straight out the window. So I kind of I was always a little um, unsure of what I was going to do. I knew what I enjoyed, and I think that was one of the issues I had in the school that I went to. That if you had ambitions of going to university and you were capable, then that was just a tick, and that was whatever you wanted to do. You were supported in that. And unfortunately for me, I chose to go and study economics up at Newcastle. Um, but really, in hindsight, I wish I'd have done something more creative around journalism and creative writing, and that was kind of what I went on to do, and started at Newcastle University, and did economics. And it was very, very difficult because back then, to do a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics at Newcastle University, you didn't need A-level maths. And I remember my first lecture with a great professor called Professor Mike Jones-Lee, who sadly passed a couple of years ago. And he said it was Economics 101, Maths for Economics 101. And he said, right, we're going to pick up where you left off at A-level maths. And I remember looking across to my friend Adam that I'd just met the previous week, and he just looked at me and he said, "You haven't got A-level maths, have you?" And I said, "Absolutely not." He said, "It wasn't a prerequisite. It is now, and,
Right.
and rightly so." But yeah, so I kind of struggled through university in terms of my degree, and I managed to make a fist of it and get a scraper 2-1, which I did. And then I didn't really know what I wanted to do. All I knew I wanted to do was go traveling with my friends after university, and that's what we did.
So, that. What was your early perception or your early choice? How did you see yourself once you decided that you were
Yeah,
going to get into the
yeah,
workforce, right?
yeah.
You was it straight into Accenture for that 5 years?
It was, yeah. So I suppose it's difficult to talk about my career without bringing in some personal aspects of it. So,
Mm,
whilst I was saving to go traveling with some friends, I worked in a bar in Saltaire in West Yorkshire, just outside of Bradford. Lived with my uncle, and I also worked in a call centre for the Woolwich in mortgages. And I
yeah.
spoke to financial advisors and customers, and I sat next to a lovely girl called Carly, and we got on really well. She'd studied at Newcastle. We didn't know each other from then. And I suppose halfway through saving up for traveling, I decided that I did need to get a job for when I returned. So I spoke to Carly very often. Like we'd sit next to each other, chat between calls, and she mentioned a brother had just recently got a job at this company called Accenture, and I'd never heard of it. High
Mm.
performance delivered. I thought, oh, that sounds like a bit of me. Um, And she was like, "Yeah, he's starting on 32K. He gets a 10K signing on bonus, and he gets this much
Right.
holiday day." And I was like, "Well, that's me sold." I was like, "How do I get one of these jobs?" So I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to go into simply because it was around the number that I was going to earn, and that's really what drove me towards
Yeah.
Accenture, and that's what kind of motivated me to put an application together. And I had Gavin to speak to, who was kind enough to let me know about his um, interview process. So I obviously got a head start on that. And then went down to London a couple of times, had the interviews, the assessment centre, and then got offered the role. So I was going away traveling. In October, I think it was October the 6th, 2008, I would start at Accenture.
Yeah. And did they send you a? Did they? Was it a kind of send you away? You know, you sign on, you get the bonus, and they send you away because you
Yeah,
know when you get
yeah.
back, you're going to have a party in Bali because when you get back,
Yeah,
it's
well,
80 hours
it
a
was it
week.
was more it was more a bit of both. It was more have a party while I was away and then have a party once I started, because part of it was we did some training in London, and then we went from London over to Chicago, or outside Chicago, to a place called St. Charles. And this was like ideal for me because it was a load of new people to speak to. Everything was paid for, money in my back pocket, a job. This was absolutely fantastic. And it was
Yeah.
people from Brazil, the Sao Paulo office or the New York office. And it was just a great time to meet people very similar age from different
Yeah.
backgrounds. And it was amazing. And I think even then, what I didn't realize about myself was it was the people that I really enjoyed about the
Yeah.
role, like meeting different
Yeah.
people and doing that. And
No,
I,
sure.
I did enjoy that about consultancy when it started. It was the
Yeah.
traveling around, it was meeting new clients, meeting new colleagues, and yeah,
Yes.
it was great up to a point for me. But
Sure.
I think at that time, it's probably fair to mention that my mental health wasn't the best, and I'd been away, and prior to starting at Accenture, I'd had a bout of depression, quite severe, that meant that I'd cut short my traveling and flew back from New Zealand, just to basically seek some medical help, because it was really, really poor. I
Right.
wasn't sleeping, and my friends were just didn't recognize me, and I couldn't communicate. So I came home, and then I started on some antidepressants. I got well, my mental health improved, and then I started at Accenture, and then from then on,
Mm.
probably for 4 or 5 years, I didn't look back. I
Yeah.
just I just worked hard, enjoyed myself, and then I suppose looking back, it was quite hedonistic, and it's
Yeah.
no reflection of people at Accenture. This is just me personally, but I had a great time and I met some fantastic people. But it was quite a precarious time in my life, because what actually was happening is I was living through a period of mania, and that kind of mania went on for a few years, and kind of culminated in when I left Accenture, which maybe we leave out of this. That's maybe another podcast.
Yeah. So in those Accenture days, right, when you joined and it was that
Yeah,
you were excited about the money,
yeah.
what were you selling then? How were you how invested? How much belief did you have in
Selling the
what you were
dream,
selling?
Alistair. Selling the
What were
dream. The
what were you
dream.
selling? And were you on board, right? The
Yeah,
Accenture
yeah,
dream that you were selling. How
yeah.
on board were you? Like 10
I,
out of
I
10
think
or you know,
well, I was never 10 out of 10, if I'm perfectly honest. And I think those that were 10 out of 10 are still at Accenture now. I often look them up and think, God, they're still there. Good on them.
sure.
Like, yeah. But no, and I think you had to believe in yourself. You had to be very confident. Um, I mean, a lot of it was, it was quite funny, because I went in and worked with HMRC up in Newcastle on a program based around national insurance numbers and work items, which is basically how they're processed in the tax system.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I also went and worked with Lloyd's Banking Group, and retail finance, and it's very different feel, but it was much the same in that. I mean, you worked hard, you worked really hard, and I mean that was always it. It was always who was working the hardest kind of
No,
thing in these situations,
totally. Yeah.
and I didn't mind that whatsoever, and it was it was very competitive, and it can be quite it's very corporate, I suppose. And I
Yeah.
think it wasn't until I kind of stepped away from that I realized that maybe wasn't a good fit for me. But I did enjoy it whilst I was there,
Yeah.
and I think it was quite obvious though that it wouldn't be me for all of my career.
Sure. And while you were there, were were you encouraged to, just drink the Kool-Aid and believe 100% in the Accenture products, or were you encouraged by people there and leadership there to kind of like think differently, challenge the products and services you were selling, or was
Yeah.
it their way or the highway?
No, I think really looking back and looking at the people I work with and some friends that I still have that I work with at Accenture, the very consulting evolves, everything evolves, it changes every 2 years. There's a refresh, a revamp. There's new areas that come up because AI it's now important, and it wasn't even a consideration before. So there's always that drive towards new thought and new thinking and new ideas, and essentially new selling. Like, how are we going to sell this?
Yeah.
Why do we know more than the client, and what can we sell to the client? That was
Yeah.
always first and forward, and it's got to be, I suppose, at a consultancy.
Yeah, I mean, if you could give a piece of sales advice to David Sten, on his day one at Accenture,
Yeah.
what would that be?
Ooh, sales advice day one. Don't or do well, probably be yourself a bit more, like bring your personality into it. I remember going to Bootle in Liverpool. So there was like a satellite office at the Triad in Bootle, where Jamie Carragher's from, for any of you football fans.
Okay.
And he pulled up one day outside a great sandwich shop called Spoilt for Choice, or as we called it, Spoilies, and came in and ordered his sandwich, which I thought was quite nice and humble. But I think when we started there's a lot of middle-aged women that worked there, and they'd worked there since a lot of them were in their late teens or early 20s. And I remember I really enjoyed it. I got along with them really well, and so did the rest of the team. But they were like, "Oh, here we go, just another robot in a suit, kind of turning up," because that's how they saw us, really. Like we'd see. I mean, I was a bit different because at least I was northern, but most of it would be a load of Southerners turning up to Liverpool in a suit, young, and then orchestrating the room and telling them what to do. And it's a hard thing when you're so young to kind of execute well. I did work with lads that were incredibly affable and easy to get along with, and really collaborative, and that really helped us build some great relationships with the women there. And when we left, we in our flats in Liverpool city centre, we actually stayed on our last weekend, me and three of the lads, and we put on a party for all the ladies at HMRC and a couple of guys that we'd worked with, and it was an
Yeah.
absolute scream. And I think really bringing yourself to work, not just being the NASDAQ FTSE version of yourself, really helps with selling. And I think at the end of all these companies and corporations and organizations that we work with, there's some very, very down to earth people, and they're the people that you've got to win over. That's the people that you've got to be effective with. You've got to understand their position. You've got to understand their kind of what things they're finding difficult in their role, what ideas they've got. I think that was a massive thing that we realized is like listen to their suggestions, the people that have done this for years and years. And I suppose that in a nutshell will be what I'd take back to 2008, and probably drink a bit less as well.
Work a few fewer hours. Okay, so I mean, it's that, at that stage of our careers, you have that dream, you're chasing the income. It was same for me. It was like, I want
Yeah,
a salary with a good, and that's almost the reason for going to work. But then
yeah,
things change, right? As we start to look back, and once you've
yeah,
got a few years in your career, you start to then analyze and think about it, and things
yeah.
obviously inform. So how, after you'd left, right?
Mm.
When you were left, and you'd gone, um, the adventure, the Accenture journey was over. You know, what did you were you conscious about what you fancied next, or how that might change about what
No,
you
no.
say?
Again, it was very much back to pre-university, deciding on what I wanted to do, was again unsure. And my mental health, as I mentioned earlier, took a turn in 2000, end of 2012, early 2013. So the mania that had been building up over that time since taking the medication in 2008 It left me in a situation where I was really unwell, so unwell that I ended up in a psychiatric unit and was then diagnosed with bipolar. And I lost a lot of good friends, and I wasn't at work obviously at this time. And Accenture were really supportive. They were fantastic looking back. They gave me the space. I mean, once I came out of that kind of manic psychotic episode, I didn't check my phone for months. And they when I did pick it up and speak to them, they were fantastic. And then all of a sudden I decided, when I came out of a depression after the kind of the psychosis, the mania, and really dismantle parts of my life personally and friendships and family, that I just wanted to get away, and I wanted to move to London, and I wanted to get back into consulting. So I just took the next role that I could get based on my experience. And that role at the time was with another company in London. I didn't want to travel around as much. That was quite onerous, and it's quite demanding on your personal life, because you'd kind of come home on a Friday, and then by the time you've done your washing, if you get to come home on a Friday, you pack in your bag again at lunchtime on a Sunday, so you don't really have a weekend, and and then you're working on the train on the way up or the way down or wherever you're going, or the flight. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I looked at a London-based consultancy in and around London, and I worked there for a couple of years. But really, it was a little soulless, and I found myself working across the city and Canary Wharf, and it wasn't a fit for me. It just wasn't, and I wasn't in a good place. And in this period of my life, I kind of lost a lot personally, and I wasn't in a good way, and I was just putting one foot in front of the other every day. And then eventually I decided at the end of that 2 years, I was really unhappy, that I'd move back to Doncaster, because my older brother had just had his youngest boy. And I just thought, you know what, like, I'm going to go spend some time around my family while my nieces and nephews are young, simply because this is no alternative what I've got at the moment. I was in a house share in Wimbledon. All my friends were settling down, getting married, having kids. I was late 20s, early 30s, and I just thought, I'll go back to Doncaster and look for some work there. So that's where the kind of career change came. And I came to working with Close Brothers. So Close Brothers are a merchant bank that operate out of the UK. They were, I believe, in the FTSE 250 the last time I checked. And there was an opportunity to work with their motor finance business in Doncaster, which was a subsidiary of their offices in Wimbledon and Crown Place in London. So I took that and I moved back, and it was it was slower, and it was a change of pace, and it was doing something I'd not done before. So it was working as a business analyst in IT, but the transferable skills from working in consultancy meant that I could do that role, and I was quite confident in it. So I kind of started there in 2016, and had just met Laura, my partner, before moving back at a friend's wedding. And that was a kind of seed that had been planted, and we'll come back to that. But I worked then in Doncaster for a couple of years, and then I couldn't persuade Laura to leave Brixton Electric Avenue to come to Doncaster. Who would believe it? So in the end, I decided to move back to London once again. So I went back to London and transferred internally to asset finance, and worked for Close Brothers Asset Finance out of Wimbledon. And again, did that for a couple of years, 2-3 years. And to be honest with you, I could do the role. One thing I did love about the role was the stakeholder management. I really, really liked that. I mean, the more technical side of things maybe wouldn't have been my most positive. And I'm sure that would be reflected if you spoke to some of my old team. But on the personal side of things, and that's where the kind of sales comes into it, I was always quite good at influencing and building relationships with people, and I really enjoyed that part of the job.
Sweet. Tell me about how did that? Where would you say, out of all the places you've worked, have you had the most belief in the products and services that you were working to sell?
Probably when I ran my own confectionery business when I was 15 in the playground, and I was able to make as much money as possible on the markup from the local shop. But then I got a girlfriend and handed that over to my friend James, who ran it into the ground. No, I'd say, I'd say,
That's
I'd
it.
say, I'd say where I am now. I'd say I've never worked anywhere where I felt more a part of the organisation, more a part of everyone's pulling in the same direction. Like I've never worked anywhere like Turn to Us. Like I haven't. It's just the most. It's the best decision I've made professionally is getting away from the corporate world and going into charity world, just because it really reflects. And I've said this a couple of times to some friends. They're like, "Oh, well, what do you mean you work with great people?" I was like, "I've always worked with great people. I have like, and the people I've worked with are always fantastic, great people. But this time, everyone's got really similar values, and they really work hard to drive those values
Mm.
home, and everyone's in it together. And I never got that sense of it in big organizations that I'd worked in, and I never got it in little organizations I've worked in. I mean,
Yeah.
I worked as God, I've had some cracking jobs. I was thinking about this before we
Yeah.
got together. I think I was looking at I did silver service once in a summer in Newcastle. I also worked as a distributor of beer at the Chesterley Street Cricket. And I just think when I looked at Accenture and these banks that I worked at, and it was also that I'd got to see into other organizations. It wasn't just working with Accenture and Capco. Like I got to see HSBC, I got to see DWP, Lloyd's Banking Group, Halifax, all these organizations. And it was always the same everywhere that it was you in your individual team, you seem to be pulling the same direction, but the overall organization
Yeah.
doesn't. Whereas I feel now at Turn to Us, I really believe in what we do, and it's not for profit, and it's not to make rich people richer. That's just not what we're doing.
Mm.
That for me means so much, because when it came to the end of my time in my last two places where I worked, I was spending most of my time or spare time working on charity initiatives or working on well-being initiatives for mental
Yeah.
health. And I was doing a lot of fundraising. I was doing a lot of volunteering. And
Yeah.
when my son arrived in January, I just thought, do you know what? How can I make this what I get paid to do? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm doing this
Yeah.
anyway, but why not?
Yeah.
Why not make this my main source of income? And this is what I kind of do Monday to Friday. And I'm so glad I did.
Well, you're doing what you love, and
Yeah, yeah,
that's how you get belief in
exactly.
the highest level of belief in
Yeah,
products and services. To what extent do you think it's turned to us and what they offer and what they do, at where or is it where you are in your life and your career
yeah.
now, or is it a
I
combo?
think
How would
it's
you trade that off?
Yeah, I think it's a combination, and I think I'm under no illusions that if you put a application in front of me at 21, 22, while I'm in that call center up in Leeds, and it's turned to us, and you can go and do this, I wouldn't even give it a second glance. I'd just move on, because I wasn't in that place then, and
Yeah.
I think it's taken me a lot of growing up. And recently, I was at a pro-Palestine march outside the GMC for Barclays, and I got chatting to a retired GP, and he was from Leeds and he studied in Newcastle, and he said, "What do you do?" And I kind of talked him through it, and we had a lot of time on our hands, and we talked through it, and he said, "Well, you know what?" He said, "You're 40, and it sounds like you've really found where you want to be." Um, and you know what? I envy those people that know that at 18, 19. But you know
Yeah.
what? There's people out there at 60 that still don't and never get there. So I think once you do find something you believe in, if it's in your professional life or personal life, I think the satisfaction from it and the well-being is so good.
Yeah. That's it. It's to believe in what you're selling, you've got to know what floats your boat, right? And
Yeah,
then get
yeah,
into that. You've got to know yourself, and that is hard. But actually taking time out and actively thinking,
yeah,
or actively spending time working on yourself, like as you did, which is,
yeah,
what did I want? What do I want now versus what I wanted to do in the past? I love the
yeah,
fact that you effectively turned your kind of hobby into your job, like that.
yeah,
That's fantastic. So
yeah.
look, that is that. I really appreciate your time. we're banging out of time now, David. Like, thank you so much for your time and your feedback. I mean, it sounds like it's a UK business challenge that your mate ran your speech off into the ground. This
Yeah,
must be an investigation,
yeah.
and
No,
I'll be
thanks, Al, for inviting me. I appreciate
no,
it.
my pleasure. I'll be keeping my eye out for Cara around Spoilies next time I'm up that way. Um, if anybody's enjoys the conversation, the topic we've dived in today, you can get more episodes at thesalescoop.com. This is our 46th live show, and a week today, Kieran and I are going to be presenting B2B outreach that cuts through. That'll be Kieran, Gill, and I. So that's us for the day. Thanks very much for your time, Dave, and your insights on why belief's so important and what people can do to improve their belief in what they're selling. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Cheers, Al.
Bye bye.